Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, September 17th. This is your daily Buckeye Fix. I'm Tom Orr. We are officially 5 weeks and 2 days away from the first Saturday of the 2020 Big Ten football season. Yes, really. Conference approved an 8-game regular season starting October 24th and running through December 12th with a week of games on December 19th, matching up the teams from the East and West divisions against the team that finished in the same spot in the standings on the other division. So there will be a Big Ten championship game like normal between the first place finishers. There will also be a game between the second place team from each division, all the way down to what will probably be the seventh place game between Rutgers and Illinois or someone like that. Tony Gerderman and I did an hour on the Ohio State perspective on all of this news yesterday. So just search Buckeye Weekly to find that story. Today, I wanted to have on our good friend Bill Bender of the Sporting News for a more national perspective on all of this. Bill, this has been a long and painful month and a half for Big Ten fans. How are people around the rest of the country viewing this news? Is the Big Ten, being smart and setting themselves up to play safely, or is this like a league that panicked and canceled too early and now has to backtrack because they realized they made a mistake?
I talked to Mike DeCourcy, my colleague, college basketball writer at Sporting News, about this yesterday, and I came to the consensus that at least it's a plan. I don't know if the plan's going to work. I think they're doing their best from a medical standpoint with all the protocols that are, I don't want to say over the top, but they're tough. I mean, that they're definitely got a high standard for clearing players, and if a guy gets COVID, the 21-day thing, that's significant. And like I said, I think it's a plan in a season where Kevin Warren repeatedly used the word fluid when everything really is fluid, Tom. It's like Arkansas State and Memphis played 2 weeks ago. They're on pause. The ACC's had multiple cancellations. The SEC hasn't even started yet. So I can't say with 100% certainty that it was right or wrong or how they did it. I know the PR nightmare is over, and at least they're going to give it a try.
Yeah, and the not only is the PR nightmare over, as soon as they set the schedule, the Nebraska players dropped their lawsuit. I think Tom Mars has called off the dogs on his FOIA, so they have solved a whole bunch of problems with the start of the schedule. We'll see if they have created some new ones with the fact that they don't have a whole lot of wiggle room inside the schedule. 8 games in 8 weeks is what it's looking like, but I think any Ohio State fan listening to this would have happily taken this a week ago. So let's take a win where we can take it. This is already shaping up to be a weird season. I mean, you were just talking about all the games getting canceled, and we saw, even when there were games getting played, 3 Big 12 teams last week lost to Sun Belt opponents all on one day. And, with all the questions about whether guys are going to be healthy and able to play from week to week. I mean, are you anticipating this just kind of being a year full of just crazy upsets across the country?
One of the things I thought about with those upsets last weekend, with Iowa State getting beat by Louisiana, K-State losing to Arkansas State, not so much Kansas and Coastal Carolina, but the effect of not having a full stadium in college football. And that sounds like an excuse, but you wonder, is it a little bit different on third down for Louisiana and a full house in Ames? That's been a traditionally tough place to play. Will it be different for somebody coming into the shoe when there's not 100 and plus thousand people in there screaming at them on third down? And you and I have been in that stadium when it absolutely does make a difference, especially for the offense of other teams. I even noticed that in the NFL on some level, where you don't have, well, it didn't matter with the Saints, I suppose, but it matters for teams like the Vikings that lose to the Packers and others where, the quarterbacks get the signals. That's what I'm most interested in terms of that. So not having fans in the stands in Big Ten games, given some of those hostile environments, to me, it's significant.
Yeah, and that's the sort of game-to-game perspective. On the broader scale with the national championship, college football playoff. I mean, there's a bunch of uncertainty there as well. I mean, it did not take long in Columbus. Once the joy from the initial announcement subsided, it did not take long for the think they're going to win the national championship this year. It never takes long for the conversation to turn to that around Columbus and surrounding Ohio State football season. How much to you does this late start, or the fact that they're going to be playing 8 games, whereas the SEC probably going to be playing 10 games? How much does that put them in a hole to make the college football playoff this fall, or is that something that the college football playoff committee is just going to kind of go, yeah, it's a weird season, and they'll probably put a Big Ten team in it?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I think with the Big Ten, you mentioned it earlier, one of the flaw in the plan to me is that there's no margin for error off the field. in terms of if once we get into this season and let's say Michigan State, they still have problems with COVID on the campus. Do they have to shut down 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What does that mean for their schedule? As far as, the playoff race, the immediate argument that comes to mind, the hypothetical is, let's say Ohio State loses a game. We'll use them as an example. And then they win the Big Ten championship, finish 8-1. And Florida goes 10-0, but loses to Alabama. And we're sitting there arguing about the last spot between 8-1 Ohio State and 10-1 Florida. This is a totally feasible scenario that I would hate to be a part of, because you know how vicious those arguments are going to be because the one team played 2 more games. Now, that's part of the risk factor, though, because I think it does put pressure on Ohio State more than any other school to be perfect this season, if that makes sense, because they want to leave no margin for error on the field either.
Well, as they are trying to be perfect this year, it sounds like they're going to get a little help back. Wyatt Davis announced on Wednesday night that he is planning to return to Ohio State after opting out. I think there's still some paperwork that needs to be signed and I's dotted and T's crossed, but he is headed back. Cornerback Shaun Wade also expected to announce his decision on whether he's going to come back. That could happen as soon as today. If those two guys do come back and the Buckeyes are able to stay reasonably healthy this fall, where do they fall in the pecking order of national championship contenders to you right now?
Well, I'm sure Ohio State fans that were watching the Clemson game Saturday night weren't just watching Clemson. They were sizing it up. If you have Shaun Wade, this is one of the lead discussion in Columbus before COVID was there was a regret and remorse about how last year's game against Clemson ended because, quite frankly, Ohio State had that game in hand and let it slip away. Now, Clemson looked pretty good on Saturday with Lawrence and Etienne, the depth they have on the defensive line. Getting Wade and Davis back would be huge for that. I think Alabama's the usual suspects. One of the interesting developments on my timeline Saturday was I felt a little bit more normal knowing that Texas and Oklahoma fans were arguing about their quarterback on my timeline over one Spencer Rattler tweet. So those 2 teams will be in the mix as well. And I think that's probably, unless somebody else out of the SEC sneaks in there, that's probably your playoff pool in a lot of ways. And Ohio State definitely legitimizes that because I think if we got Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, and Oklahoma, yeah, it's the same old suspects, but I'd take it tomorrow because I know it'd be a pretty fun show.
Well, there's a very smooth transition from fans arguing on Twitter with rival fans to my next question, which is that the Buckeyes' road to a Big Ten title probably got a little easier on Wednesday, thanks to some stuff that happened up at Michigan. Hey, fans that Ohio State fans like to argue with. How about that? Quarterback Dylan McCaffrey announced he's going to be leaving, transferring. He's not going to play this year, so Joe Milton will be QB1 up in Ann Arbor. But wide receiver Nico Collins also opted out. That is a pretty big loss for them. He is, if you don't remember, if you have somehow blacked out last year's Michigan game, what the Ohio State defense looked like against the Michigan offense in the first half, Nico Collins, very, very big play receiver for them. Probably did not get the ball as much as he should have over his career, but he was a major, major threat. He is now not in the picture now for Michigan anymore this year. We obviously don't have the schedule for any of the teams yet, but assuming that just looking at the rest of the Big Ten on the whole, is Penn State now by far and away the most dangerous opponent that Ohio State could have to face in the conference this fall?
Yeah, and wondering, I doubt they get Micah Parsons back, but that would make them even more so. Just because he seemed to have made his decision already to prepare for the NFL draft. But I think Penn State, talent-wise on offense, some of the questions they have on defense I have. Michigan losing Mayfield, Nico Collins, Dylan McCaffrey. I think Ambry Thomas is still up in the air as of now. They have a completely retooled offensive line, issues all over the place. But they do have I'll give them one thing. They do have a way of they'll have a couple guys pop up that we don't really know yet that'll end up being decent players. But is it enough to threaten Ohio State and Columbus? Probably not. I don't know that there's a loss on Ohio State's schedule. I don't know that Wisconsin's good enough or anybody out west. But to answer your question, yes, Penn State with the offensive talent they have. But again, we were there the last time. Ohio State, has trouble getting out of that whiteout. The whiteout's going to be a lot different if it's not completely whited out. I think I use that as a verb. It works. And then it's just going to be a little bit easier, I think, for Ohio State to go out there and win.
And just to circle back to Michigan real quick, I mean, you mentioned the offensive line, basically rebuilding all of that. They do have both of their running backs back. Zach Charbonnet's back, and they also get Chris Evans back. He missed all of last year with an academic issue, so he's back as well. But without that offensive line, when you're rebuilding an offensive line, that's a team you want to get early in the year. And Ohio State was getting Michigan relatively early in the year. They were supposed to be playing them October 24th. That's early compared to normal. That obviously is not necessarily the case anymore. Now they're going to open October 24th. But with the new schedule, it has not been announced yet. Obviously, Purdue's AD said on Wednesday that the expectation was it was going to be based on the initial schedule. So not the one that was released in August, but the one that was, after the non-conference games were canceled, and it was just, started with Rutgers and went from there. It sounded like it was going to at least be based on those games. So if it's based on those games, would you like to see the Ohio State-Michigan game move back to the traditional last week of the season kind of spot? Or would you rather see it earlier and, on the idea that, well, if something gets canceled, if something gets blown up, at least you get the Ohio State-Michigan game in?
No, put it last. Now you put it last for sure, because that was one of my nitpicks with the schedule to begin with, is if you think you can play on October 24th, then you're assuming you can play on December 12th. So just put it at the end of the schedule, give both teams something to work toward. These are two programs, I think we talked about it last time, that they base a lot of their program around that game. I mean, it's that last moment. It's going to be a little bit later. That's fine. It'll be interesting to see what they do with the crossover opponents. I'm super intrigued by that end of the year quirky thing they put in there where it's 1 through 7 versus 1 through 7. That's a excellent play by the Big Ten there in terms of, like you said, Illinois, Rutgers, and, are we going to get Michigan? And I guess that would be a Michigan-Iowa game. That's what that feels like there, something like that, all the way up to the top. And I'm totally excited for it. It's kind of like I used to watch wrestling. I'm not into it anymore, not like some of our mutual friends, but it feels like that like Survivor Series thing where you work it up to the first matchup. I think that's a genius quirk that the Big Ten worked in the schedule. So prop to Barry Alvarez and the scheduling committee for that.
Yeah, it's almost the Big Ten ACC challenge in basketball, except it's in football. And I guess instead of chanting SEC, everyone gets to chant EAST or WEST.
Yeah.
And
go from there.
Instead of conference pride, there'll be division pride on the line. Can't wait. Yeah, that is definitely going to be, in a year full of different and interesting and first-time things, that is definitely going to be one of those really interesting, different things that'll just kind of be a fun, different twist this year. I mean, we don't know exactly what the bowls are going to look like. We don't, I think the sense is that the college football playoff is going to go off without a hitch or as scheduled. Bowls, we don't really know. So that's kind of a little bit of a weird, fun, quirky little postseason twist. If that's the only postseason, at least you've got that. Bill, thank you for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you taking the time. This has been, my goodness, this has been quite a week already. And we're expecting to have interviews with OSU players, perhaps coaches sometime this week, and then really hit the ground running next week as the Buckeyes start ramping up for the season. That did not seem like it was going to happen pretty darn recently. So, hey, that sure seems like a great time to join Buckeye Scoop. We've obviously got plenty of free content like this podcast and the rest of our great shows, but there is a lot more insight, scoops, and analysis in our insider section for the price of a lousy chain store pizza. You can be plugged into all of our insiders and the incredible community that we're building. So that's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.